All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Jeff Gumas. I believe we are live now, and welcome to this week's webinar, which is actually part one of two in a series of webinars that we will be doing revolving around the Workforce Investment and Opportunity Act. Today's webinar is Building Meaningful Pathways for Adult Learners. During this, we'll talk about WIOA and how it impacts adult educators. This is an informative session intended for you to better understand the elements of WIOA, what career pathways means in terms of WIOA, and to come out of this with some strategies for how you can begin implementing the elements of career pathways as defined by WIOA. Next week's webinar will be a follow-up, same time on Thursday, and you will get an invite in the days following today's webinar, where we'll actually be talking about McGraw-Hill Education's solutions as they align to career pathways. But today's session is information only, and we have a lot of information for you, so I am going to go ahead and get started. The way we're going to structure today's session is going to be 4 parts. We'll do a quick introduction of WIOA, and the second part of today's presentation, I really like to get into how we got here. So we've all heard of the Workforce Investment and Opportunity Act, which is the follow-up or the reauthorization of what used to be the Workforce Investment Act. We all have heard there's going to be a lot of changes that need to be happening in terms of integrating career pathways into how we deliver adult education. But I think it's important to know that this legislation is not just something that just someone pulled out of thin air, that there have been a number of initiatives over the past 10 to 15 years that have led to some of the best practices that are now incorporated into the legislation, into the requirements for adult education and for all of the services that touch our adult education students. From there, we'll get into a brief overview of WIOA requirements, and basically we'll take one of those elements or requirements, which is career pathways, and the last section of today's webinar we will talk about 5 key impacts and solutions that revolve around the elements of career pathways as defined by WIOA. One thing to make note of, you during in the invite or the follow-up to signing up for this webinar, you did get a PDF that is our guidebook for WIOA, and those last 2 sections are actually sort of a detailed presentation revolving around that guidebook. If you have it handy, great. If not, don't worry, we'll be covering all of the information here. You have it in a previous email. You will also be getting a follow-up email after this presentation in a few days that includes a download for that guidebook as well. So let's get started. Introduction to WIOA. The goal of WIOA is, and I'm just going to read this verbatim, to help individuals access employment, education, and training and support services to succeed in the labor market and to match employers with the skilled workers they need to compete in the global economy. Over the past year, since WIOA was enacted, states have been required to develop a state plan, and there's 2 types of state plans that all 50 states at this point have now submitted to OCTAE to identify and describe how they plan to provide services to adult education through the various areas, the various titles, which remain the same from the original WIA. So all of the plans had to be submitted by the end of April. I believe there were some few stragglers and there were some delays that pushed that deadline back, but I believe at this point all 50 states have submitted plans. I'm actually going to share a link in a second that allows you to go and see your state plan as well as all other states' plans. But there were 2 types of plans that states had to submit as part of their 4-year workforce development strategy. The first type was a unified state plan, which included all 4 of the titles that were part of WIA. And identified how the 6 core programs worked together to articulate services to adult education students. The other option was a combined state plan, and that plan had to include all 6 core programs as well as 1 or more of 11 additional eligible partner programs, such as Perkins or TANF or SNAP. Some states are doing a unified plan at first, but are intending to pull in some of the elements of combined state plans by bringing in some of those other partner programs down the road once they get their feet a little wet with the current legislation under their unified plan. We've taken a look at a number of the state plans at McGraw-Hill Education, and we've seen some common goals across those plans that I wanted to outline here. So of the 50 state plans, and we certainly have not looked at all of them, but of the ones that we have looked at, we've seen some common goals that are articulated within each of those plans. And in bold are the ones that are of interest to, I believe, everyone, and in particular adult educators. Career information, knowledge, and skills. It's important that we're providing job seekers and employees and our students with information that's going to help them understand what is needed for them to advance into high-skilled careers and high-wage careers. Another goal, and a common goal, is to increase the number of individuals with industry-recognized credentials and certificates. This not only includes things such as the high school equivalency tests that lead to a high school diploma within a state, but also some post-secondary, both degrees, certifications, and industry-recognized credentials. There's definitely an increase in the support and the emphasis on apprenticeship programs, as well as a common goal for all education provision to be really focusing on not just providing academic or test prep skills, but integrating that education with technical training so that we're streamlining both the academic and the technical skills that learners need in order to advance. Some additional goals that are common across state plans are increasing opportunities for adult learners to transition to post-secondary credentials, to provide employability and soft skills instruction based on employer needs, and this is a key one not just for our adult education students, but for all job seekers. There's a huge emphasis on the need for employability, soft skills, or essential skills, as some folks call them, in terms of workplace behaviors and being effective employees. To increase the value of the workforce system for employers. So we, as adult educators, are obviously focused on what I will call the supply side of the talent pipeline, but on the demand side is the employer. And it's hard for employers to become invested in a system if the system is fragmented. So the goal of WIOA is to really streamline how we are moving students through the education and training they need in order to access the jobs that our employers are offering, thereby making this a more valuable workforce system for that receiving end or the demand end of the talent pipeline. And finally, to base all programming on the demands of local and regional job markets. We've seen cases where there's been innovation in education for adults that's focused on high growth industries and or industries within the area, but when there's not communication in terms of what the actual job demands are, sometimes those initiatives, as innovative and as good-natured and I'm trying to think of a word and I can't. Sorry, I just can't think of the word. While the focus is good, sorry about that, if they don't actually match the needs of the employers, then they often tend to fall short. And finally, as part of that, increasing business engagement with a clear value stream for everyone involved in the process. In terms of the common strategies that we've seen across the state plans, these are the things that we have seen. Sector strategies or career pathway strategies if you're talking from the education side. Regional partnerships, so that means bringing in all of the important players, including industry leaders, workforce development boards, community colleges, and adult basic education providers. Integrating the services that each of those programs is providing. And one thing that's important and definitely new as part of this is utilizing labor market and educational data and technology to inform decision making. So it's not just sort of hearing or knowing that certain industries are coming in, but actually using reliable and valid real-time labor market information to really provide a landscape in terms of not only what the jobs are now and the skills needed for those jobs, but projecting out in terms of what those needs will be for the future, so that these initiatives are sustainable over time. So, as I said, I wanted to talk about how we got here. And there's really two parts of how we got here: trends in education and trends in labor. We're going to look at both of those right now. In terms of the education side, we've all heard some of the stark statistics that have come out over the past few years in terms of the state of the education system within the United States. There are 26 million adults currently who lack a high school diploma. That number increases by 1 million students annually dropping out, or 7,000 per day. And when you have that happening, obviously you are increasing a pool within the workforce of folks who are not qualified for the jobs of the 21st century. In terms of what we do in adult education, statistically over the past few years, only about 750,000 students annually are actually receiving or earning their high school equivalency. So if you look at that 1 million dropouts annually, compared to the number of students who are actually completers of high school equivalency, you're looking at about an additional 250,000 net people within the U.S. labor force annually that are being added to that labor force and lack a high school diploma, and this is one of the major barriers to employment. In addition, so where does our role come into that? We know that adult education serves only 2.5 million students annually in terms of formal adult education through WIOA Title II. And the estimated portion of our 2020 workforce already beyond the K-12 system is over 65%. So those numbers obviously stress the need for more education provision that is aligned to the needs of the workforce. Put a little differently in terms of the numbers, 88 million out of 150 million adults in the U.S. workforce today have some sort of barrier to family-sustaining employment. As we mentioned earlier, there's 26 million adults who lack a high school diploma, obviously a barrier to employment. If you look at the breakdown here, 18 million of those students, that is their one barrier, but you have an additional 8 million who not only lack a high school diploma, but also speak English less than very well. Again, a barrier to family-sustaining employment. There are 56 million adults who have a high school diploma but no college, and as the job demands increase and the U.S. attempts to be more competitive in the global workforce, the skill demands of those jobs tend to require more than a high school diploma, again making this a barrier to employment. And then combined, we have about 18 million, north of 18 million adults in the U.S. labor force who speak English less than very well. On the labor side, what we've seen is basically a shift in the workforce in terms of the skills that are needed. In 1950, or as early as 1950 back, 80% of the jobs in the U.S. workforce were unskilled jobs. You could perform the tasks of those jobs with just a high school diploma or even not having completed your high school schooling. As of 2010, 85% of the jobs in the United States workforce were skilled jobs, meaning that you not only needed a high school diploma, but some sort of post-secondary in order to be effective in that job and to have a career pathway within that industry. What we know statistically of the jobs that are in the pipeline for the United States, that of the 30 million new and replacement jobs of this decade, 63% require some college, and of those 45% require an associate's degree or higher. So on the adult education side, we have made a number of strides towards trying to fulfill our end of that bargain in terms of raising the bar of the status of students and workers in the field who have their high school diploma and have some sort of post-secondary. That's required changes in mindset. That's required changes in standards that we've seen. That's required changes in testing. With WIOA, changes in legislation and funding. And then again, in the next year or so, you're going to see more changes in testing, testing that is more rigorous to show educational functioning levels. And this is a slide I like to show that sort of puts all of that in perspective. If you have any questions on any of the acronyms in the slide, please feel free to put it into the question box and we will answer it. But here's a breakdown of what's happened in adult education in terms of trying to raise that bar since 2014. In 2014, the testing service released a new GED test based on the college and career readiness standards, which were a subset of the Common Core State standards. As we all know, after that, the high school equivalency market opened up, with CTB developing the TASC test, the test assessing secondary completion, and ETS developing the HiSET test, which is the high school equivalency test. So we've tried to raise the bar there in terms of the rigor that is needed for high school equivalency. Just 1 year later, the Workforce Investment Act, which is why we are here, was reauthorized, forming the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And here's the one that a lot of folks are unaware of, or you may be aware of, but all of us sort of are in the same seat in terms of not knowing what this will entail quite yet. In early 2016, the NRS released new final college and career readiness-based EFLs. Those are the educational functioning levels that we use to show student improvement over the course of the year if we're using NRS testing for our funding. That will mandate new versions of the TABE test and CASAS by 2017. So all in all, we have been attempting to increase the rigor in terms of what we are doing to assure that our students are ready for college and career ready, essentially. But in some cases, there's my other acronym, because this is a lot for folks to understand. And it is understandable to think, wow, we're being pushed to do a lot of things, and now with WIOA we have one more thing, what's going on? But despite all of these testing changes and standard changes, it remains to be seen that if by doing so, what we are doing is creating a worker supply that actually matches the employer demand. So while we have increased our academic standards, while we have increased the rigor of our academic tests that align to those standards, there's still an important piece missing there, that if the things that we are teaching and the things that we are testing students on do not match the demands of employer, we're still going to have a break between the worker supply that is provided by the academic side and the education side and the employer demand and the needs of labor. Because of that, in addition to everything that's been happening in terms of our standards and testing, there have been a number of initiatives over the past 10 to 15 years revolving around career pathways in adult education. This is a nice graphic that I tend to use that sort of highlights the various pathways for education, for employment, and for other types of training services that sort of display the continuum of what a true career pathway is for adult education. The source of this graphic is Jobs for the Future, and they're actually responsible for a number of the career pathways, actually all of the career pathway initiatives that I'm going to talk about in the next few slides. But what you'll see here on this graphic is on that top bar is the continuum of the education benchmarks that one goes through within adult education. So many of the folks on this call, I'm assuming, are in that very first tier, looking at adult basic education, ELL instruction, and work readiness. And that then leads to what's called bridge instruction, potentially, because oftentimes, as we know, even completing GED is not necessarily, or any high school equivalency is not necessarily equated to readiness in post-secondary. So one of the things we will talk about is bridge instruction that has come out as part of these career pathway initiatives. Occupational certificates and career academies through career and technical education services could be the next step of that in a career pathway system, focusing on giving the academic skills that folks need and then immediately moving them into training programs that get them occupational certificates that are industry recognized. All of that actually falls before, on this career pathway continuum, formal post-secondary education through the community college to get associate's degrees and obviously four-year bachelor's degree. What I like about this graphic, though, is if you look at it, it shows a number of entry points and exit points in and out of education and in and out of employment as someone makes their way along a career ladder. And the important part of WIOA to understand is the goal of these initiatives that we've seen that have been successful is to attempt to not go through this series of academic milestones that is exhaustive and is time-consuming and does not fit the needs of our students who need to get into jobs immediately. Rather, to figure out what are the academic milestones that are needed so we can immediately get these folks into jobs, and then what types of incentives can we provide to make sure that they don't drop out of their educational pathway once they get that job, but continue with their educational pathway as they are making their way up a career pathway. That's the goal of WIOA, and some of these initiatives that we're going to walk through have had some success in coming up with systems that allow for that to happen. This is another graphic that shows career pathways in terms of the core functions, and I think it's a good one to look at. If you look at these top two pieces, these are both what we can provide in adult education: participant-focused education and training, consistent and non-duplicative assessments. But beyond just the education that we're providing and beyond making sure that it aligns to employer needs, any good career pathways system also needs to provide career navigation and support services, as well as employment services and work experiences. That is not necessarily something that we are going to be able to cover today, nor is it something that I can really impart wisdom in terms of how you go about doing that in your local community. But just teaching the skills is not enough, and in terms of the requirements of WIOA, it's not enough for anyone to just be developing curriculum or new ways of teaching. We need to make sure that they align to employer needs, but we also need to be working with students at the start of their continuum all the way to the end so that we can make sure that the career goals that they have are set and are in place at the start of the continuum as a motivating factor all the way through, and that we're also revisiting that as we go to make sure that they're on track. This is just another diagram, and what I like about it is it sort of articulates that in a similar way, looking at just sort of the three core functions and features. Again, at the start, it really needs to be a well-connected and transparent education, training, credentials, and support services. For all of those things to be well-connected, that requires collaboration and partnership between the various entities. And in the development of your state plans, in terms of the theory behind WIOA, all of those relevant agencies, the 6, were supposed to work together in terms of developing it. That's a key element in order to provide a cohesive system where everyone who's supposed to be a part of this pathway knows their role and knows how they are supposed to function within the career pathway system. More importantly, for the learner standpoint, are these multiple entry points and multiple exit points, so that again they are in employment and they are actively working in employment while they are actually receiving the education and training that will allow them to not only maintain that job that they have, but advance within their career. Not going to spend much time on this slide, but in terms of the overall system, this is from the Career Pathways Initiative, and these are all of the elements of a career pathway in terms of the various agencies that are needed in order for it to be effective. Again, what we're focusing on today is what educators need to be doing, so I'm going to move on from that slide. So one of those initiatives that I was talking about earlier, and part of what Jobs for the Future was doing, was called Shifting Gears. And this started in the late 90s, and it was a 6-year initiative that was funded by the Joyce Foundation and run by Jobs for the Future that involved 6 Midwest states, all Great Lakes states: Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan. And these 5 states were charged with developing a career pathway system and figuring out what worked best for their state through funding that was provided by Joyce Foundation, and then formalizing that into actual career pathways for adult education within that state. They just released last year a sort of end of initiative study that focused on 3 of the shifting gear states, Illinois, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. And in terms of participants of their programs over the past 3 years, actually a little bit further back, 2011 to 2014, you can see there's been a nice rise in the number of students that are participating in these career pathway-oriented programs coming out of those 3 states. But what I really thought was interesting from this study and the sort of end of initiative study were the definitions of career pathways that came out of the shifting gears states. If you take time and scan through each of these definitions from Illinois, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, you'll see a lot of commonalities in terms of looking at post-secondary occupational content in key industry sectors, support services being a part of all of them. But one of the things that is within the first 5 words of each of these definitions is the word bridge. And that was a concept that came out of this initiative as being key to success for reaching more learners and getting them into family-sustaining careers faster. Was this concept of bridge instruction, which, if you recall from the diagram that I showed earlier, is in between what we provide as adult education, adult basic education, and occupational certificates. So what is bridge instruction? Bridge instruction is exactly what it sounds like, a bridge that allows you to bridge the student who is in an adult basic education environment and focus on the academic skills that are needed based on the jobs that you are moving students toward. So at the very start of it is a career pathway goal. Bridge programs tend to be bridge to careers in health sciences, or bridge programs for transportation, distribution, and logistics, or bridge programs for manufacturing, where the curriculum isn't fixated so much on necessarily the high school equivalency test. It isn't necessarily fixated on the TABE test, but those may be factors in terms of the academic skills that are being provided. The focus, however, tends to be on the technical skills that are needed in order for learners to actually enter into employment sooner. And that becomes the focus of curriculum. What is done then is the academic skills that are also needed, the core academic skills needed for success in those entry and mid-level jobs, become an integrated part of that curriculum. So you're learning technical skills while academic skills that are important for success on the job are integrated. In a well-designed system, those academic skills also align to some of the measures that adult educators need to be looking at as they're working towards showing student improvement and getting funded through things such as NRS testing and high school equivalency completion. But essentially, what bridge programs do is bridge the employers, the demand side, with the educators, the supply side, and those folks work together to develop a curriculum that is going to streamline those learners going from adult basic education into jobs sooner through clear career pathways. So out of not necessarily just shifting gears, but some of the career pathway initiatives that have been happening is the iBest model. And many of you have probably heard of the iBest model. Some of you may be actually using iBest in your state. iBest stands for Integrated Basic Education and Skills Training. And it's a model where there are actually 2 educators working with adult students. One is a technical or occupational focused instructor, and the other is an academic or an adult basic educator. And they work together to, as I just described, teach curriculum that is focused on jobs that are available to students within an area. And while the technical content and occupational content is taught, the role of the adult educator in that program is to integrate the basic academic skills that relate to the content being taught. So they're not just learning academic skills for the sake of academic skills, but they're learning them in the context of the careers that those students are pursuing. So iBest is one of the best practices that has come about as these career pathways initiatives have been tested. And the follow-up to Shifting Gears, which was Accelerating Opportunities, really codified that iBest model by looking and providing grant money to states looking to implement the iBest model within their states. When we talk about bridge programs, there's really two ways that you can actually be implementing this. And as you start thinking about how to design curriculum and the focus of your program and your career pathway program, this is an important difference that I only learned about a year ago last fall at the NCTN conference. So you may hear the terms contextualized instruction and integrated instruction interchanged as people are talking about career pathways. But they really are two different sort of philosophies behind how we actually integrate or contextualize academic and technical skills together. And the focus and which you decide to use, is really going to be based on the type of learner and programming that you're offering. So contextualized instruction is teaching academic skills against the backdrop of a sector-specific context. An example of this might be a contextualized HSE program, or even a career readiness program that's focused on something like the Work Keys test. The focus is the academic skills. If you're dealing with learners, say, who are in adult secondary education, they're really close to attaining their high school equivalency. The mindset here is let's get them to that point. They're so close, let's have them earn that. But while we're doing that, instead of just teaching a high school equivalency prep program and the skills that are needed, let's add a layer of contextualization to that so that they're not just learning the academic skills, but they're learning how they actually relate to the context of the workplace and as best you can to the careers that those students are actually pursuing. So contextualized instruction really could focus on any level, but a lot of times it's used at that higher level as you're contextualizing that finishing part of adult education, that high school equivalency, but making it more relevant to the learner by contextualizing it. Integrated instruction, which is the IBEST model and what came out of the Shifting Gears initiative and Accelerating Opportunities, allows you to actually scoop a little bit lower in terms of reaching lower level learners. So instead of focusing on these tested skills per se, you're focusing on the skills that students need in order to actually get into a job. And the way you do that is you integrate academic skills into the occupational content that the students need to learn in order to attain that job and become employable. So certification prep programs, credentialing programs, and bridge programs all use integrated instruction by focusing on the technical skills content that they're going to need in order to attain jobs, and at the same time building in academic instruction that relates to those, typically focused on math, language, reading, and writing, the skills that they're going to be using on the job and the content areas that they're going to be using on the job. It's an important difference that I just wanted to point out. When looking at the Accelerating Opportunity Initiative, it's one that happened in the early 2010s. You can see some statistics here. It was a successful program. It was implemented in 7 states, not the same 7 states that implemented Shifting Gears, but these were programs that truly focused on career pathways. They focused on specific high-growth industries within their area. They focused on the occupational content, and they integrated in academic skills into that content. A follow-up to those was also the TACT grant. Now, the TACT grant, the Trade Adjustment Act grant, happened between 2011 and 2014. And there was $2 billion up for grabs over those 4 years for community college consortium who implemented some of these best practices, career pathway programs that were aligned to high growth and high demand industries within their areas. If you go to the TACT website, you can actually look up some of the consortia that were winners of this grant money, and the average recipients received around $20 million in grant money. And a lot of the content that was developed as part of the TACT grant program was required to be open educational resources. So in terms of getting started and looking at what are other folks doing, what is a successful career pathway program, if you go to the TACT website, you can see who these grant recipients were. You can see the initiatives that they designed that ended up winning grant money. And you oftentimes can actually see some of the resources that they developed in terms of curriculum that allowed folks to do that integration of occupational skills with academic skills needed. Here is a slide that shows those resources. One thing that I meant to mention at the start of this webinar, and I forgot to, this webinar will be recorded and available to you. You'll get a link to it so that you can go back and find any of these things. But here are links to that Shifting Gears initiative if you want to learn more about what happened there, the Accelerating Opportunity initiatives, both from the Joyce Foundation and Jobs for the Future. So what are your requirements now that we are in an age of WIOA? The main requirements of WIOA, and this is where we get into that handout, the PDF that was sent to you as part of this invitation, are integrated education and training and career pathways. We've already kind of covered integrated education and training, and here is how that's defined by WIOA. A service approach that provides adult education and literacy activities concurrently and contextually with workforce preparation activities and workforce training for a specific occupation or occupational cluster for the purpose of educational and career advancement. So what does that mean? Well, it means doing a lot of the things that we know we're supposed to be doing, and that is integrating a lot of the skills that are needed for a well-rounded individual, not only for academic and future post-secondary success, but for career success. So that includes basic education and skills, critical thinking skills, digital literacy skills, industry-specific skills, and essential or soft skills. But in the course of our typical day, and by the measures that we have been measured by consistently over the past 2 decades in terms of our funding, we're often left with this dilemma. We want to teach critical thinking skills. We want to teach more contextualized industry-specific content. We want to teach computer skills, and we want to teach employability skills. However, the skills that we are supposed to be teaching are those academic skills, and at the end of the day, when it comes down to thinking about what I need to teach in order for me to continue my funding, we're going to teach the skills that students are tested on. And this isn't to say that those skills aren't necessary skills, but we tend to be forced to ignore some of the skills that students actually need in order to be functioning citizens and functioning employees in a 21st century economy. The goal of WIOA is to help free that up by demanding that folks work together, and that as we design curriculum, we're thinking about how to integrate more of these skills into what you're doing. So how do I do that? Which skills do I teach is the first question we need to ask. And this is one of the things that's truly highlighted in WIOA, is that we shouldn't just be teaching skills for skills' sake, but we need to be making sure that the skills that we're teaching are aligned to high growth and high wage jobs that are in your region or locality or the region of the learner, and that they're aligned to the needs of local employers. I have 2 anecdotes here for initiatives that I've heard about in recent years that, again, were well intended but fell short because they didn't necessarily do these 2 things. I was at a conference, the National Association of Workforce Boards conference, a few years ago, and it was in a county in Ohio where they knew that a number of IT companies were coming into the area. And so the community college got together and said, well, we should start developing some career pathway programs that align to IT careers, because there's employers coming in. There's obviously a need for folks that have IT background. So they did that. However, they never actually coordinated or collaborated with the employers in the area. And so while they did develop a curriculum that did align to IT skills, when they finally sat down and actually talked with employers, what they realized, and the employers were quick to tell them, is yes, these are IT skills, but these are not the skills that are needed for these jobs. If you want to find jobs where these are the skills, your students are going to have to relocate, and probably to India, because US-based tech companies and IT companies don't have jobs that require these skills. There are more advanced skills needed. So the lesson learned there is if you're not actually talking with your local employers, you could be designing curriculum that doesn't align to their needs. And so as well-intended as your program is, and it may relate to high-growth industries, that specificity of knowing what is needed in your locality is crucial. And that's a part of what WIOA hopes to do. On the flip side of that, in terms of understanding your regional job market, we've heard a lot of health science programs that have come up. There's been a lot of nursing programs that have sprung up to work with low-level and low English learners and get them into health science careers such as certified nursing assistants. Again, well-intended in terms of the purpose. However, if you're not checking your local market information, you could actually end up oversaturating the market with folks within a particular occupation. So while we know that allied health careers are going to be on the rise as the baby boomer generation retires, we need to make sure that we're looking at what are the career what is the career outlook and job outlook for the specific careers that we're moving learners toward within our locality. As long as there's continued growth, we should be developing programs that help create more of a workforce aligned to that career. So how do we do that? One of the things you're going to start hearing about is real-time labor market information. And what that is data that is provided by a number of different service providers that really, it does what's called spidering job websites and looking at the requirements of skills within an area, as well as just by way of knowing that within a specific zip code, there are this many job postings for this job, and comparing that to Bureau of Labor Statistics and other forms of data can give a real picture of what is the labor market need for specific jobs based on skills, geography, occupations, the certifications within an area. Our focus right now is on, for us today, is skills and certifications, but this is something that you're going to be hearing probably more and more about. A company that comes to mind is Burning Glass. They are a company that provides this service so that at the start of designing curriculum, you work with Burning Glass to understand what are the highest demand jobs in this area and what are the specific skills required for those jobs. Those are two immediate pieces of data that can help inform how to design a career pathway program that brings in all of the various entities that are required to work together through WIOA. So how do you do that? It's as easy as 1, 2, 3. First, you start with real-time labor market information. Understand what the skills are that are needed in order for jobs within your area. And use that data to identify the specific skills within those various areas we looked at earlier. From that, map an integrated skill curriculum. Now, this is obviously easier said than done, but what I'm going to talk about now are some of the tools that are available to you to help start down this road. The second element of WIOA is career pathways, and career pathways as defined by WIOA includes 5 different criteria or elements. Adequate preparation, skill integration, they need to be pathway focused, they need to align to industry, and they need to include some sort of degree and certificate attainment. So what we're going to look at now specifically is the career pathways and 5 of the impacts and solutions for you that you can be taking away today based on those career pathway elements. Here they are again. So the first one we're going to look at is pathways focused. What does that mean? For a career pathway system to be pathway focused, it should help an individual enter or advance within a specific occupational cluster. So that could mean they're on the start of that journey, but if you think back to that career pathway diagram that I showed, those entry and exit points, we need to identify clear milestones, not only between where they are and where they want to be, but what are the milestones along the way that they're going to need to complete in order to get there. And this includes career guidance all the way through are working with these learners, on-ramping instruction that helps them truly get into and comfortable into the academic setting again, as well as teaching employability skills, another key part of making sure that that learner is work ready. Sorry. In its simplest form, what we're looking at is really at the very start identifying where the learner is and working with that student by things such as interest inventories and skill inventories, understanding where do I want to be. That's step 1. By identifying the where I want to be, it's the goal of a career pathway system to have that sort of endpoint in mind from the very start, and then to build those support services around what do we need to do to help get that learner to that point. I'm actually going to show you a tool right now that you may be aware of that can help you do this. Again, my goal is for you to leave today with tools and strategies for implementing these things. So in terms of career pathways, here's the first tool that I'm going to talk about. It's called My Next Move, and it's part of the Department of Labor, Employment, and Training Administration. Sorry about that, another acronym. DOLETA's ONET site, which is an occupational database that they run. So My Next Move is a career interest profiler, and the way it works is the student is actually asked a series of questions that relate to career interests. You can see them here. These are just basic tasks that one might do in a job, and the student rates using a rubric what their level of liking each of those tasks would be within an occupation. After the student goes through all of these questions, there's a total of 60, they get a profile. And if you look at the bottom of this graphic that you can see, there's sort of a scrubber in which they're showing where they are along this process of completing the interest profiler. So within their results, they get to see where their strengths are in terms of how their interests align to the various types of, not intelligences, but basic skills in terms of the workplace. This is one that I did, and my high sort of elements are more social elements are what I'm interested in, and more artistic elements actually are what I'm interested in. The student has the ability to actually look at what each of these things mean, but then as they continue through, what's nice is they can look at the types of jobs, careers, start getting a sense of some of the jobs that might be out there that match their interests. What you can see on the graphic I'm showing you right now are two things. A listing of careers, and if I were to click on any of these careers, I'd learn more about that specific career. As you can see, I am a former educator, and I feel like in my job I do continue to educate. You'll see I have a number of teacher careers in here. My top two are both teaching careers. If you look above that, you're going to see something called click to change your job zone. I'm in job zone 3. So another nice feature of this tool is that job zone is something that I can indicate to say, well, this is the level of training that I want to complete. So it not only lists jobs based on the careers that match your interests, but you can also click and go higher or lower to see, well, if I don't want to get any sort of post-secondary degree, what are the jobs that match my interests? As I go to higher levels of job zones, those represent added education. At the level 3, I probably need some sort of post-secondary certificate or credential in order to be a preschool teacher. There's a reason you don't see elementary school teacher or high school teacher or middle school teacher here, because job zone 3 does not require a post-secondary or 4-year bachelor's degree. In order for that to happen, I would need to go to a higher job zone, and again, the more education, I'm going to get a different listing of jobs that lists jobs based on my interests, but aligns to the degree or certification attainment that I'm interested in pursuing. Completely free tool that's available to you right now. As we're thinking about career pathway focused and working with students on career pathways, I like to think about keeping eyes on the prize for that student. This shouldn't be just an upfront task that we do with students, but something that we're continuing to do with students, reminding them to look back at what their goals are in terms of career, reminding them of what it is they need to do in order to get there. With that information, though, it's our job to design a clear education and training plan that's going to help them get there, to make sure that as we're doing that and as we're building in milestones, that we are establishing relevance to learners all along the way, to provide continuous motivation to them as they're working within a career pathway program. And just to sort of continue on that sort of rant, I guess, is that just because it's career exploration does not mean they're not learning. There's a lot of skills that you can be teaching as part of the process of career exploration. As we were looking at that tool, if they were to explore careers within the ONET site, there's occupational profiles that you can use to help them learn how to navigate websites, how to find information within websites, good locating information skills. There's plenty of writing skills that you can be doing as students are going through that job search and interest sort of process. They can look at jobs that are in their area and practice writing cover letter writing. They can learn how to make lists and list out and start planning and goal setting for the skills that they need to work on in order to match the skills needed for those careers. So all of these are part of the job search process, and that should be an important part of what we're doing with students, not just sort of a nice to do at the start of the career pathway process. The second part of the 5 elements of career pathways is industry alignment, and this is a really important one. I'm not going to go too much into depth here, but I am going to show you another tool that's actually available through the DOL that can help you start designing curriculum that is aligned to industry needs. And alignment to industry needs not only looks at the technical skills, but also the academic skills and the digital literacy skills that are needed for that. So when you're designing your programs and thinking of those milestones, understanding what are the credentials that are recognized in an area is important. A lot of those bridge programs that I was talking about earlier, part of the basis of the curriculum that they'll build into their system is, okay, what are the certificates that are needed or wanted and recognized by employers in my area? Let's look at the skills that are needed in order for students to pass that certificate exam. And they use that as the basis for not only the technical curriculum, but they also focus their reading instruction, their math instruction, and their language instruction on what students are going to need in order to pass that exam. So that's one good sort of starting point when you're looking at mapping out what are the curriculum goals and what are the objectives of my curriculum and integrating academic skills into it. Working with employers is also another key feature, because just because we have, again, those certification exams or credentials or industry recognized models that we're going to look at in a second, you always, always, always need to be making sure that, yes, this is a certificate, so what does my regional or local employer actually validate or want from that certificate? What are the key skills that are part of that certificate that are valued to employers? As you start talking to employers or chambers of commerce or career one-stops within your area, you need to realize that we on the education side tend to speak a different language than those on the labor side. So we say students. They often say customers or clients. That is the same person that we're both serving. We tend to say career clusters. They tend to say industry sectors. We tend to say career pathways, obviously what we're talking about right now. Industry tends to refer to it as industry sector strategies. So these are just some sort of nomenclature things to be aware of as you're talking about this. It's the same type of system. It's the same person that we're focusing on, that is the learner and the potential employee. As we're designing programs and working with employers, we need to make sure that we are on common ground in terms of the language that we're speaking. Another tool that can be used for designing curriculum are industry competency models, and this is what I referred to earlier as something that is free and available to you on the Department of Labor's site. What we're looking at here is the manufacturing competency model. This was developed by the Manufacturing Institute, and the American Association of Manufacturers. And this is a certification and skills continuum system that was developed to help educators understand how to design curriculum for manufacturing careers that is recognized by leading industry institutes such as the Manufacturing Institute, but is also recognized by employers. And what this model does is it shows the various building blocks of academic skills that are needed within any career in manufacturing, regardless of the career pathway within the industry itself. All of these layers, the red and the 2 grays, are generalized academic and technical skills that folks need in order to succeed within the manufacturing industry. The certificate that they align to these skills is the National Career Readiness Certificate. If we move up to the blue level, it looks at actual industry-specific competencies, but they're industry-wide competencies. So whether you intend to be on the supply chain logistics side or industrial maintenance side of manufacturing, these are all skills and competencies that you need in order to be an effective employee. And they match the various certifications within manufacturing to these skills. The DOL site, if you look up industry competency models. This is what's called the Competency Model Clearinghouse. They have competency models for all of these industries, and within some of these there's actually multiple models. Within the health industry there's allied health, and there's about 3 others that relate to health industry focus. And all of these models were developed by industry leaders within each of these sectors or industries that we're looking at. If you click on any of the building blocks or the competencies, it provides additional detail in terms of what the objectives should be for achieving that competency in terms of your training program. I'm going to skip ahead because we're about 5 minutes out from the end of this webinar, but I also wanted to point out another free resource that you can use. It's the Employability Skills Framework. This was designed by the CTE, the Career and Technical Education organization that's part of OCTE as well, and it outlines all of the employability or essential skills that are required that we should be teaching our learners as we're making our career pathway programs. Curriculum that we ensure is hitting upon each of those things in terms of our occupational focus, and then again working with adult education, blending in those academic instructional and academic skill strategies. Understand as part of this process that you are not an island. So those partnerships and the collaboration that you're going to hear repeatedly, it's both within the legislation, it's going to be within your state plan, and you're going to start hearing it as your state plans are rolled out. Collaboration and partnership are crucial for the success of your program. So working with Career One-Stops, working with post-secondary career and technical education, working with your local chambers of commerce, working with other organizations and local employers is going to be crucial for understanding what true industry alignment is in terms of the occupational content that you begin delivering as part of your career pathway services. Here are links to all of those things that I just referenced. Skill integration is a biggie, and I'm going to fly through this a little bit. The focus of next week's webinar is going to be on skill integration, but this is where we're looking at making sure that the academic instruction that we're providing aligns or is integrated into that occupational skill content. For you, I know, and it is the life that I live in terms of developing career and curriculum for adult education. It is so important that everything we do, we know actually aligns to the things that are important to us. And as has been the case, and will continue to be the case to a high degree, we need to make sure that the skills that we are teaching align to the tests that we are being asked to administer to our students that are being used to show level gains or high school completion. When we're teaching workplace skills, such as reading and vocabulary or math and locating information, we need to sort of stop and not just go, this doesn't align to TABE, but start thinking about how do these skills, contextualized skills that are workforce-oriented, align to the tests that I am being asked to administer. Because in many cases they do. If we're teaching an applied reading for information skill, we are teaching skills that are applied that actually cover a number of the foundational basic skills, and I'm looking at TABE as an example here. So reading for information is one of the skills tested on the Career Readiness Certificate test. By way of teaching those, you are teaching TABE skills, and next week I'm going to show some alignments that help understand how skills that are related to the Work Keys test and the Career Readiness Certificate actually align to TABE. In terms of designing your curriculum, however, there's plenty of ways that you can be providing real workplace contexts for the reading material that you use that help students see relevance in the reading skills you're trying to teach. I always, in terms of as I'm developing curriculum, I'm constantly saving my workplace emails because they're great fodder for what we ultimately actually put into our products. So if I get an email that's related to dress code or the new health insurance plan, that's related to anybody in any career. But it's a really important document for students to be understanding that this is the type of thing that you're going to have to read in the workplace. I can start teaching you things such as main idea and details, and things such as purpose or understanding the author's purpose in sending this document. Here's an example of something that could be available to you right now, the OSHA Construction Handbook. If your focus is construction or any industry, there's OSHA documentation in terms of the safety and health requirements for that career. That is a relevant workplace document that you can be using to teach reading skills. Contextualized vocabulary instruction is also something that you could be doing with workplace emails or other emails by talking with local employers and asking them for their employee handbook, for instance. Workplace documents such as the things that are posted in workplace lunchrooms or break rooms. This is how workplace documents are organized and how we organize information within documents. Here's a dress code document that I referred to earlier. Locating information is another part of the Career Readiness Certificate test, and I'm kind of going to fly through these. Again, these are things that I'm going to be covering next week, and hopefully you can join. But locating information refers to understanding graphical information within the workplace. So again, lots of relevant examples that you probably could stand up right now, leave your office, and find within your school or within your facility. Here's a copy request form. This is something that I have to do if I want copies made. This is how to locate information, how to fill out forms, an important skill for all jobs. Here's how to take a schedule and scheduling employees for work shifts in an entry-level job, a shift manager for a local sandwich shop. But you need to be able to locate information. You need to be able to understand what employee availability is and understand what the maximum hours are that you can assign a part-time employee, and use that to fill out a schedule. Again, another locating information skill. Here's the occupational profile that I mentioned earlier from that ONET site. Again, as part of your career pathway and interest inventories, as you're looking at career pathways for students, have them look at careers. Have them explore websites. This is great fodder for you to teach skills such as locating information. If you look on this occupational profile, it shows that there's links. If you click on those links, it's going to lead you to specific information. Ask your students, such as, well, how would you find out what the wages are for this career in your state? That's one of the tabs here that they can look at and find that information. Sorry, I clicked on the wrong thing. Applied math is another area where, again, we can be contextualizing now. This is something that you can be doing now in terms of looking at the types of scenarios for word problems that are given to students and making them more workplace related. Again, anything when we're talking about applied mathematics, it relates to TABE. You're covering more than just those foundational skills. So you could look at existing problems that you might have in current workbooks and materials that you have. In this case, let's switch this from being focused on the consumer here. Susan buys $47 worth of groceries, and let's turn it into an employee. You are a cashier at a specialty food store. This is the same context, but looked at from the employee side, so they see counting change and understanding how to make change from the amount that I've been given is an important workplace skill. Using measurement and things such as graphics like as this in order to put it into a workplace context. This is construction. This might be something if you're doing a home improvement project. This is related math information to the student that applies to them in work and in life. And again, looking at things such as contextualized measurement, telling time. All of us need to use time management, which I'm failing to do right now, and I apologize in terms of limiting this to an hour, but look at sort of understanding how to tell time and understanding how to schedule things. In this case, as a nursing attendant in a nursing home, making sure that patients are taking their medication, and understanding if you have rotations or durations with which periodically you have to administer more medication, using the math to figure out when those times will be that you have to administer medication. We're on sections 4 and 5 of Career Pathways. I promise you it'll be done in 5 minutes. This is a quick one. Adequate preparation, in terms of what WIOA defines as part of Career Pathways, looks at the what is needed to successfully prepare students for secondary or post-secondary options. This is something that's going to be defined in your state plan. Some states are going to define the various tests that are needed. Some states are going to define how you need to be aligning to industry and what sorts of credentials you might need to have students completing. There's lots of alternatives or alternative pathways that states are already experimenting with in terms of how they are considering someone to be adequately prepared. One example I'll bring up right now, and I just learned about this at the COABE conference, was the state of Ohio has an alternate diploma program. And rather than requiring a high school equivalency, that is one way in which someone in Ohio can get a high school diploma, they're offering an alternative method. And that method requires the student to attain a industry recognized and employer recognized within the state of Ohio industry credential or certification. That's one part of getting this alternative diploma. The second part is taking the Work Keys test, which is the test from ACT that aligns to the National Career Readiness Certificate, and requiring that the student, based on the occupation they're pursuing, reach the level that's defined by Work Keys as being what is necessary for someone to be career ready in that career. So by attaining the post-secondary credential, and that's recognized by employer, I cannot stress how important that is, that employer recognition, combined with earning a career readiness certificate aligned to the level needed for that occupation, and a student in Ohio can earn their alternative high school diploma. This is something that different states are going to be experimenting with. I encourage you to talk with folks in your state to find out what's going on, but I think we're going to see a lot of experimentation going on in terms of what it means to be adequately prepared. And that innovation that's happening is really an important part of what WIOA is in terms of freeing up folks to attempt those innovative models that might be better suited for our learners. There is not a one-size-fits-all model. We're starting to see that, and we're starting to find ways to have many models that work for our student population. The last element of career pathways is degree and certificate attainment. This could be industry recognized credentials. This could be high school equivalency credentials. Again, this is something that's going to be defined by your state. As you are looking at degrees and certificates and credentials, I wanted to bring out something, that's important. And that is when we're looking at industry recognized credentials. These are some stark statistics that are important to understand, again, to make sure that we're not misaligning our efforts as we go about designing our career pathways programs. The importance of talking to employers in terms of identifying industry recognized and employer recognized credentials is crucial. Lumina Foundation is currently doing a connecting credentials study that is trying to make sense out of the madness that is credentialing in the United States. And these are some statistics that I found from their site. In the past 30 years, there's been an 800% increase in the number of certificates awarded by post-secondary institutions. There are over 4,000 personnel certifying bodies within the United States. And within that, there's a number of certificates that each of those industry certification bodies gives out. We looked at that manufacturing model. Manufacturing has 4 or 5 different certificates. So there's 4,000 certifying bodies, but tens of thousands of actually certifications that they offer. However, less than 10% of these certificates have been accredited or reviewed by a third party. So it is crucial that you make sure that the credentials and certifications, that you're building into those milestones, those academic milestones for students, are industry recognized and employer recognized, but also that they're actually accredited. That they not only work for employers in your area, but outside of your region as well. Because the goal of credentialing is for these credentials to be stackable, as well as transportable and transferable into other industries and into other regions should the learner have to move for whatever reason. We don't want to just pigeonhole them for jobs in the area. Hopefully they have the ability to move where jobs are and move where works best for them as they try to move along in their career pathway. So what's next in terms of building your pathways? Again, we're going to have a webinar next week that talks about some of the curriculum pieces, but these are your next steps in terms of things you need to be thinking about. Who is your target population? How do you go about building those employer partnerships? With those partners in place, how do we work together to determine what the required skills are for our learners looking to fill jobs in the area, and what are the steps for acquiring those skills? What are their certificates? What are their credentials? Do they need high school equivalency? Are we going to provide that as part of the continuum they need? And using that to map your integrated curriculum. One of the things I failed to mention during this, and I meant to mention earlier, is with those employer partnerships, one of the big incentives that has been part of WIOA, and through hearing just the sort of the roadshow that's going on with the Department of Education and the Assistant Secretary, has been on-the-job training and apprenticeships. But on the job training side, as we look at trying to bridge students into careers faster, the focus really is build these education and training programs so that students get into jobs sooner rather than later, and incentivize for the employer not only to take on those employees as they onboard them into entry-level or mid-level careers, but also to provide supports that allow them to continue their education through on-the-job training, through allowing them time to continue their academic pursuits. Maybe you're bridging them into that career. They don't yet attain their high school equivalency, but the employer, as part of the partnership, agrees to allow them to have work hours that give the student the ability to study and move their way towards that high school equivalency degree. Or test and completing it. Because one of the things that has been not a failure but a lesson learned from bridge programs is the design being, okay, we're going to get them a certificate right away. 8 weeks, we're going to take someone in at TABE level M or D, and we're going to focus on the Certified Nursing Assistant exam, and that's going to be how we teach reading and math. And at the end of those 8 weeks, they're going to test to earn that CNA certificate. That's a great goal. That's an incredible milestone for that learner, and it is definitely motivating. The problem with just doing that and not working with employers is that student says, great, I got my certificate, I'm going to go get a job, and they fall off of the education continuum that's part of the career pathway. And as you and I know, it's hard to get them back in. So in order for them to truly have a career pathway, that partnership is important because you need to incentivize providing on-the-job training for employers, and WIOA builds in a lot of that. And I think you're going to see more on-the-job training initiatives happening in your state as a part of your WIOA state plans. I think I said this probably 20 times. I'm not going to say it again, but in terms of where you begin for partnerships, these are some examples that I've heard. Large corporations are obviously great, and local chambers of commerce, but small business associations are also really important. It's actually a lot easier in many cases to bring in local employers and small businesses into partnerships in terms of hiring our adult education students than it is larger corporations. So you could start small. And the human resources departments of local employers is a great place to start in terms of building those partnerships. Here are two sites that have great additional resources for WIOA. The National Council for State Directors of Adult Education has a WIOA resources page. And the National Skills Coalition is a nonprofit based out of DC. They've been a fantastic source of information for me in terms of learning about the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. The last thing that I will leave this webinar with is this. I've gone through a lot and we'll be going through more next week. Start small. I think I said this on the earlier slide. This is going to be a transition for all of us. This is not something that we expect everyone's just going to switch to overnight, having a full-blown career pathway program within the services that you provide. So the goal is to start small, and you can do that. I hope that as part of this webinar, I've imparted some strategies and some resources to you that will allow you to at least start thinking about how to start building those partnerships, where you might look for sources in terms of starting to build that curriculum. Again, next week we are going to look at integrated curriculum in more detail and some of the solutions that McGraw-Hill Education offers as part of that. But please feel free as you leave here today and as you start thinking about career pathway initiatives. Sorry, I'm trying to advance to the last slide. There we are. Please feel free to contact me. I am happy to provide more detail on any of the information that was covered today, as well as answer any questions that you may have, or try to link you in any way I can to resources that might be available in your area. And again, start talking with folks within your state in terms of what's going on with your state plan. Again, one of the slides that I showed here today actually had a link that you can go to. If you go to the National State Director site, there is a link that will provide you with a list of links that helps you understand what's going on with your state. Just continue to stay informed. We will continue to do so as well. Thank you very much for your time. I will take time now to answer some of the questions. I need to find them. But this does conclude today's webinar. If you did have a question, let's see if I can answer it right now. Most of the questions actually appear to be related to whether or not this will be recorded. I think some of them were technical issues that folks experienced. So you will receive a follow-up link to this from this webinar as part of your attendance and signing up. That will include the guidebook. I will make sure that it does actually include a PDF that includes all of these slides. I'm not sure if that's part of what is in there, but I will make sure that that is included. And again, if you missed anything, or if you want to share this information with colleagues as a follow-up email to this, you will be receiving a link that will allow you to see the recording of this webinar. So with that, I am going to end this. I hope everyone has a wonderful holiday weekend coming up. Hopefully you're starting early. If not, and have a good Friday, and enjoy the long weekend, and hope to see you back here next week. Thank you.